place there, one can't help but think, does the struggle go on forever? Is life at any time not easy? First of all, I couldn't help but think, boy, you talk about discrimination. Kill the boys, keep the girls. But somebody had a vision that that isn't what God would want. And so they worked it so that both the boys and the girls were living, which angered the Pharaoh. Now this comes about because, as we heard in the last few weeks, how the Israelites had built, had accumulated, had grown in Egypt. And Joseph had been a very strong leader in that country. But then, as time does take care of things and everything seems to be in the constant state of change, no matter how much we resist it, there is a constant state of change. And the Pharaoh had gone, and Joseph, my understanding is, had also passed on. So there was a new government in Egypt, and there were changes in the relationship between the Israelites and the Egyptians. And in that context, we find that wonderful relationship that they had changed. It went 180 degrees. The Egyptians became afraid of the Israelites, the Hebrews, and they set up a new program that put them into slavery, and as they said, depress them and work them hard, and keep them in their place. You ever hear that? Keep them in their place. But God, these were God's people, the chosen, who were to build a community and to help the people of the world understand God's relationship to each and every one of us. So God wasn't going to let it just stagnate there. So in the midst of the Pharaoh dictating that all the boy babies would be killed, and in fact, after they found out that the boy children had not been, he sent out people to find them and kill them. I mean, this is a pretty desperate situation. And if you follow down through there, then Moses is born, and an important point, I think, is he's born into the Levite tribe. Now, I know every one of you know what the Levite tribe is. You chuckle. Levi was one of Leah's children. She had Reuben, Simon, Levi, and Judah. Now, if you remember correctly, back then, Rachel was the favored wife of Jacob, and Leah was kind of palmed off on him. Is that a good way of putting it? Desperate dad forced, they describe her as being awful. That's not a nice thing to do to someone, is it? And she had 4 children. And if you follow the stories that surround that segment of the family, there was always trouble. There was always stress. There was times of war. And they were noted, the Levite tribes were noted for their ability with the sword and in combat. And so Moses is born into that tribe, which some folks would say that shouldn't be, but God works in God's own way. Because God had a mission, and he needed someone to carry out that mission. And it was time for the Israelites to leave Egypt. The time where they needed a new leader. And so, born into that mix is Moses. working through this, I couldn't help but think how often we think of people of having a charmed life because they have everything. But when you study life itself, in every community, in every family, in every individual life, there's good times and there's difficult times. And it is in those difficult times that we find that God does enter and pulls people. The difficult times seem to be those times that pull people out of that place where they are thinking that everything they have is who they are. And that's not true. Because we are deeper than the metal we ride in and the wood we reside in. We are individuals with a spirit. A spirit that is given to each and every one of us by God. And we enter into this world, into this creation, to use that vehicle, who we are, hopefully for the betterment of the creation. Moses was called to do that. Moses grew up, and I don't think we often think about this, but you know, Moses grew up to be a fugitive from justice. He did. In a fight, which was, the behavior was typical of his heritage, he killed an Egyptian soldier who was abusing the Israelite people. And then he fled. Away he went. God wasn't going to let him go. God was right there. And Moses, out wandering around in the wilderness, he had gotten married. I believe he had a child. He had a father-in-law who put him to work. Most father-in-laws, if their son-in-law isn't working, they'll find something for him to do. And his father-in-law was no different, put him to work as a shepherd, wandering around. All of a sudden, a bush. I love this story. A bush started talking to him. From a flame that wasn't burning the bush. Said, Moses, you got to go back to Egypt. What Moses do? He argued with him. I love that piece of it. You know, anybody that's been called by God has had an argument with God. I swear it as true as I'm standing up here, hopefully. And they'll argue. And they'll debate. And they'll tell all the reasons they can. But rest assured. Rest assured, under God's direction, they will follow what God needs to have done. Moses took his brother Aaron and went back into Egypt, where the oppression was getting greater and greater. And we know that the story goes on to tell us how that played out. I think in this day and age, in this time, when everything we're getting for information seems to be bad news, I think we need to turn to God and say, where do we go from here and what do we do with this, God? Because it's at your will that we function. It is in your hands that we place ourselves. I have met many people, many, who have been through disasters. And the thing that I notice is that deep spiritual element in every one of those souls comes forth. Gulfport, Mississippi, when the Katrina went through. The people came back to their churches when they had nothing else. Because they knew that's where it happens. That is their sustaining lifeblood. There you will find the grace of God. There you will find people doing extraordinary things for each other. Growing stronger in that faith